I just wanted to pick up where my colleague Phil Twyford was what he was speaking on, which is the in this part 4, which is the purpose of the bill, and address the issue that he has just brought up, and he mentioned the aspect of the value of the park being an historic one, as well as a recreational one. Of course, we've covered that quite a bit, particularly in regard to whatever the passive recreation constitutes in this park. I would imagine that passive recreation constitutes something along the lines of non-organised sport. So it would be something like people going to the park for a picnic, playing with a frisbee, whatever, rather than a full-scale rugby game, soccer game, whatever else. But the important point is here, and it was subject to some debate, and certainly a division emerged in the submitters between the Hamilton City Council that was actually favouring a recreational reserve as over an historic reserve, and I'll just touch on their thinking here, Mr. Chair, because I think it's important. Which is, and I beg your pardon here, they looked at the various classifications in their submission. They looked at the possibility that it should be classified as an historic reserve, thought that it had some merit for this to be classified as such, but then, and further investigation, believed that the powers under the Reserved Act 1977 for a historic reserve are focused on the historic values of the reserve, and they felt that it didn't adequately address its recreational role. Therefore, the recreational reserve option, which they submitted, was strongly favoured by the Hamilton City Council. And I guess from their perspective, we can see their point. However, I think some of the submitters, and Phil Twyford touched on the tree issues, and the number of very old and historic trees, some of them which, as he mentioned, where it could have been planted by George Parr himself, definitely were planted by George Parr himself back in the 1860s. But looking at this this park in relation to the historic and the history that's gone past, I mean, this is a park which is on the banks of the Waikato River, and for the people of Tainui, it has extraordinary special significance in terms of its position and its location to the river, and right beside the Rangariri area as well, which is also a huge importance. But I want to touch on two submissions that were presented by. In the course of the Select Committee hearings on this, and particularly by Laura Calloway, she mentioned that she felt that historic parks, and she made the differentiation between historic and recreational, are special places that capture features relating to the community's past. They give insight into the community, how the community is formed, and this land, now known as Parana Park, can do that on many different levels, and she goes on to actually specify a number of these. I mentioned the issue of the special significance to Tainui, but right throughout history, both from George Parr, right throughout history, we see that the Parana Park has special significance. And the debate and purpose in Clause 4, Mr. Chair, around in the Select Committee that took place between the definition of this as a recreational reserve or a historic reserve is actually very, very significant. I mean, certainly significant to those people who submitted on the case. The historic places. I just wanted to get onto this because, in essence, this is what Laura Calloway says, that Parana Park is an historic place as described in broad terms under the Historic Reserve Section 18, Part 10 of the Reserves Act, and under terms of the Historic Places Act 1993.
Shane Arden.
I move that the question be now put.
We're struggling for relevancy here. I will give the call to Honourable Steve Chadwick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
With a caution, make it relevant.
Mr. Chair, I'll be relevant to Parana Park, that's for sure, and relevant to the committee members that considered this bill with as due process of examining any law that comes before the Select Committee. And I want to talk about Clause 4, the purpose, and our previous colleagues have touched on whether it should have been a historic reserve or a recreation reserve. And Mr. Chair, as the spokesperson for heritage on this side of the House, we do value the historical aspects of telling our stories as New Zealanders, and I would agree with the Tree Trust and those that came from the Historic Places Trust before the Select Committee, because actually on the day this was debated I was subbed into the Select Committee. And I think it is of incredible significance when we're looking to the future about how we look back on our past. And I think this is an opportunity lost that we're now calling this recreation reserve. I don't know what a passive recreation reserve. It sounds like something as a legacy from the convalescent home that was closed on Parana Park. But there was an incredible history to this piece of land back from the confiscation from Tainui, and that is not commemorated in any way in this park, in this piece of land, and I think that's something that the people of Tainui will probably go to Council, and it would have been even better if Council had Māori members' rights to be represented on Council preserved as we have in the Bay of Plenty Act, and say that part of our history as Tainui does need to be recorded on this land, because we've lost an opportunity here. We've lost an opportunity to have this designated as a historical reserve, as a reserve that would have commemorated the great history of the past. And actually, the opportunity lost is really interesting, that Waikato and Hamilton City Council have foregone the opportunity, because George Parr himself was the son of a mayor of Hamilton, and he was, it sounds like he was a great fellow in the past life of Hamilton as a member of the Hamilton Chamber of Commerce. And you know, this guy, George Parr, advocated for issues that are still being advocated today, and the sponsor in the chair needs to pick up. He was looking for connecting the Waikato River with Waiuku by means of a canal. There's a great idea for an electorate MP, and I'm sure that my colleague Sue Moroney will pick that up, that bit of legacy, that bit of history, which should have been commemorated here as a historical reserve in Clause 4 of this Act. And what a pity that hasn't happened. The other issue that he was a great advocate for, George Parr, and let's remember our history here and telling our stories. For goodness sake, he was advocating for a train service from Kawhia and Raglan to Hamilton, and I think a visionary like Sue Moroney, who's picked up the rail link with Auckland, will certainly pick up in memory of George Parr what needs to be done about rail links in the great Waikato. So there are all sorts of pockets of history related to this bit of land from the confiscation on, and even there's a rather charming piece of history that could be lost. There's a little stone bridge there that spans Gibbons Creek that connects Parana Park with Memorial Park. And you know, that bridge was built at the expense of Annie Macpherson, who died in 1928. Now, how beautiful it would have been for the Hamilton City Council Parana Park land vesting bill if they had have designated this under clause 4 as a historic reserve rather than a recreation reserve. Under a historic reserve status, it wouldn't have precluded a passive recreation. That would have been an enabling component, but it would have also been another great way that the Waikato and Hamilton City could have told their history, which is a history that has been built on with the people of Tainui. So I think it's an opportunity lost. I understand that this purpose repeals the Empowering Act and vests this as a recreation reserve.
Simon Bridges.
I move that the question be now put.
Yeah, the question is that the question be now put. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Party vote. The clerk will conduct the party vote.
New Zealand National.
57 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
42 votes opposed.
Green Party.
7 votes in favour.
Act New Zealand.
5 votes.
Māori Party.
Toko whae tautoko ana.
Progressive.
1 vote opposed.
United Future.
1 vote in favour.
Honourable Chris Carter.
1 vote in favour.
Hone Harawira.
Tautoko ana. Ko tahi e tautoko ana.
Just having a little bit of difficulty with the sound feed, so the Maori vote, could you just recast that, please?
Māori Party, toko wha.
Thank you.
Hone Harawira, ko tahi.
Thank you. The ayes are 76, the noes are 43. I'll put the question, and the question is that Clause 4 stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary, no. Clause 4 will stand part. The question now is Clause 5, stand part. Sue Moroney.